It's time to add a first-person controller so that we can walk around our island and check it out. You should already have a standard assets folder in your assets. If you go into that, you should also already have a characters folder. If you don't have those, you'll need to go to the asset store and import them, or you may be able to go to assets, import package, and you may see characters there. But once you've imported it, you can go into the characters folder, click on first person character, prefabs, and we want to add an FPS controller. We could drag that to the hierarchy, but we won't have as much control on where it begins. So I'm just going to drag it over to the scene, and I can choose where do I want my player to start. I'm going to drop him right around that spot there. I have an FPS controller in my scene now. In the hierarchy you can see it, and on the scene you can see it. If I want to zoom into that, I'll double click FPS controller, move it up a little bit so that it's above the ground. This green capsule is my collider, so I don't want to start inside the ground. I want to make sure I'm above the ground. Now we have two cameras, because if I click on the FPS controller drop-down arrow, it has a first-person character is what it's named, but it's a camera. If I click on it, I can see what I'm looking at from that camera. So when I start the game, that's where I would be looking, unless it uses the other camera when I start the game. And we don't want to use this one. So we have two choices here. We can either toggle it off using that checkbox so that it's grayed out in the hierarchy and not really being used, or I could even delete it, which I'm going to do. I'm going to right click on it and delete. So now I only have one camera in the scene, and when I press play, it'll know which camera is being used. Now, because this camera is part of the FPS controller, I have the ability to manipulate it. If I move my mouse around, it rotates the camera. So I'm looking around my scene. And if I use my ASWD keys, I can go forward, backward, left, or right. I can also hold Shift as I'm moving to go faster. And so this is how you can check out and view your world, see how big those trees are compared to you. What happens if I run into the water? Whoa, I'm falling. That's kind of strange. The water is only visible from one side. I can get out of even these very steep areas by just jumping using the spacebar over and over. We'll work on the underwater stuff later. For now, being able to run around your island, jump around is a pretty good start. I'm going to press Escape so that my mouse now can come out of that area, and I can stop the game by pressing the play button again. Let's double click on the FPS controller to zoom to it again, zoom out a little bit. If I don't like the direction I'm facing when I first begin the game, which right now is out here towards the ocean, I can spin that. So I'm going to click on FPS controller, not the camera itself, but the controller, and I'm going to rotate that. And you can see, okay, now I'm going to be looking over towards the lake, and if I click on the camera, yes, that's the direction I'm looking. So when I press play, that's what I see. I'm going to press Escape again to stop the game. I'm going to click on the FPS controller, not the camera part, but the controller, to see the components that make this object. It has a transform, of course, every game object does. It tells you where it is, the rotation and the scale. But it also has a character controller component, which I'm going to collapse for a moment, a first-person controller, an audio source, and these are the components that make up this first-person controller. The first-person controller component here is actually a C# script. This is a script that Unity created for us called first-person controller, and they provide all these different parameters. The walk speed, the run speed. It knows if you're walking or not at any moment. What'll be interesting is to watch this as we run it. We'll see the position change, we'll see the rotation change, we'll see all these things change. So let's press run. As I start moving around, my position and my rotation change. If I walk, it says is walking is checked, but if I press shift, that unchecks. And we'll get into how these relate to scripting when we start to write some C# code for ourselves. Pressing escape and stopping the game. The other thing you might want to do is adjust things as you're playing the game. If I move my scene window over so that I can see my scene window and my game window at the same time, and I press run, on the left side I've got the game window, so I'm running around. But let's say I get over to this tree and I feel like, you know what, this tree is too big for what I want. I can press escape, so the game is still running, but it lets me come over and use the scene at the same time. So I've got the scene selected, I've got the scale of this tree. I can change it to, let's say, 0.7, 0.7, and 0.7, so I made the tree much smaller. Then I click back over on the game window and compare that tree size to this tree size. This one's much bigger. If I like that better, wonderful, I've changed the size. But when I press escape and stop the game, notice it went back to 111. Any changes you make to properties during gameplay are just temporary. You have to stop the game and then make the changes again. So if I really like the 0.7, 0.7, 0.7, I could change those right now while the game is not running, and it would remain. So that's it. Enjoy exploring your world and making all the little changes you want so that your world is as beautiful as can be.